What do you think are three things that make for a really bad comedy show?
Um, the room being too big,
Uh-huh.
and that includes like if it's a room where the show is happening kind of here, but there's a bar and it's in the same room. So yeah,
Right.
people that are in the space that are not there for the show.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Um, God, it's so individual of like it's people who are the problem. It's like I think it's either a host or a circumstance where they have not made clear that you're not supposed to be talking.
Mm-hmm.
There is
Mm-hmm. No
something
ground
about
rules have been
no ground
established.
rules. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Um, and then I guess a shitty comedian will
Mm-hmm.
certainly sink any show for sure.
Yes.
That's what I'd say. But I think the biggest is like the you need a certain degree of threat that you need to behave or you have to go. And when
Right.
that's not there, these shows can go to shit. And
Yes.
the number of like I recently I did a casino and there was a bachelorette party and I saw them as I was entering the space and I knew they were going to be a problem. And they're talking the whole show. They ruined the whole show. They ruined my night. It ruined everything. And afterwards, the bouncer was like, "Oh yeah, we were gonna kick them out, but you seem like you were handling them pretty well." And I was like, "But that's not what I wanted to do.
Right.
What were you gonna wait for? Were you gonna wait? I start crying and I curl in a ball on stage, and you go, "It doesn't look like he's handling this very well. Let's
Right.
let's remove them." So there's a thing where it feels like there's clubs where getting the patrons money is more important than anything else, and so they won't kick
Yes.
them out. Um,
Yes. Often I feel like that in a lot of these clubs that comedy is about eighth on their list of priorities. You
mm-hmm.
know, it's an Applebee's. It's an Applebee's where it just so happens to have a stage and people talking.
You might as well have those animatronic Chuck E. Cheese things. Like that's how they view it.
Right.
And I just don't. I just think there's a certain degree of culture where like they think comedians should be dealing with hecklers, and like you shouldn't cry if someone heckles you, but they consider it part of the show, and it's like no, this derails everything. It needs to be shut down. I did another one very recently where there was someone in the front row, disastrous, talking the whole time. And front row is even worse because no one in the back can really see what's going on.
Right.
So suddenly they're not part of the show. And the bouncer came over to them and then left. And they still were horrible the whole show. And the bouncer was like, "Yeah, I came up to them and I whispered in her ear, 'Don't make the show about yourself.'" And I was like, "What the fuck? Don't make the show about yourself?" And he said it to me as if he had said like one more word and I fucking kick you out. But I'm like, that's what you should have said.
Right. Right.
That's what you should have said. People respond to that. If I had a comedy club, I'd get the biggest motherfucker you've ever seen. And he would just be standing at the side. Oh,
Yes. Yes. And people should know, like, you almost have to make an example out of some person. We do need to lose an audience member, I think, pretty soon to sort of set the tone for like the rest of the night, you know? Like, I'm not saying any physical harm should come to them, but it wouldn't be a bad thing if someone sort of gets grabbed up by a bouncer and there's a viral video of someone getting literally thrown out of a comedy club.
yeah, yeah.
You know?
I always had a fantasy. This was more about when I was doing acting, where like I thought it would be fun if, like, in a Broadway show, you stage something in the beginning to make them really feel it. Where like they open it with a scene, someone's phone rings, and it's a plant, but like the actors break out of the scene, they bring them on stage, and they just kick the shit out of them, and then they go, "That's what's going to happen." You need it because like human beings were just we just need something extra. I mean, Broadway, it was with the phones, like people's phones go off all the time. And it's funny because Comedy Cellar where I started working, they make you put your phone in a bag, but there is also the problem then people's phones go off in the bag. They
Right.
set an alarm. Someone makes a call, and all of a sudden they have a bag that's glued shut. They don't know what to do. Now the phone's making noise. We're incapable as a species in en masse to do anything appropriately.
Yes, yes. And there's something about comedy that really draws out the people's inability to follow instruction or to sort of act as a unit. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because comedy seems like something that, like, if you go see a ballet, most of the people in the audience don't go, I bet I could do that. And I
Sure.
think with comedy, a lot of people go, this is just talking. I talk all the time.
Especially now it's sports season, and I always think it's depressing where someone loses, they're the last place in their fantasy football league, and their punishment is your profession. There
Yes.
could never be.
Right.
If you're last place, you have to perform at the Met for 1,000 people.
I used to say that all the time. I would go to open mics or whatever when I was first starting, and I would see, like, I'd see 20 people at a table, and I'm like, whoa, we got an audience tonight. And they're like, no, that person lost the fantasy football league, and the worst thing that they could think of as a punishment is to do what we do every night, which is, like, no one ever loses a fantasy football league and, like, you have to job shadow a plumber tomorrow. Like, it's the saddest thing of, like, this is the worst punishment we can think of, is to do what all these people love to do.
I just think with stand-up, they're definitely, the problem is, as stand-up is portrayed in the media and TV shows, it's a lot about hecklers and, like, shutting down hecklers. And it's hard because some people really do think that's what the show is going to be. I have a lot of times people will reach out and they'll say, hey, can you roast my buddy so-and-so? And I'm like, well, that's not what I do. There's those comics out there. But I think this goes back to, like, the idea of you would hope stand-up would have genres. I've heard people talk about it before, where, like, this is why people go and they get offended somewhere and they go here, and it's like there should be different genres of stand-up. And if you're into roasty comedy, there's plenty of fantastic comedians out there, and that's what they'll do because they don't have any fucking material. That's what they'll do. And that's great, though. That's great. Some of them are amazing. I would never dismiss their skill. I would jokingly dismiss, but it's I heard someone told me, because we performed together at Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle, and I don't think this was in place when we were there, but they said at some point they had bachelorette parties sign a contract upon entering saying they would not heckle, and they would make the comedians promise to not engage the bachelorette party. There was kind of an understanding that this thing is problematic,
Right.
and we just need to avoid it. And, like, the Comedy Cellar, you can't buy tickets in more than packages of 8, which is still pretty high, but it's still an understanding of, like, yeah, big groups are there to have fun with themselves.
Right. They're not there to support. It now becomes their night, and we're all around it instead of everybody's night together.
It's the same with theater. We all have the same struggles. It's just like comedy, the circumstances are even worse. But my school, they took our school to Shakespeare, a matinee of Twelfth Night at a beautiful theater in Washington, D.C. And our school was banned from ever going to the theater again. Because, like, we were just 50, 60 kids watching Shakespeare, fucking around. And at least with comedy, you can address it a little bit. But when you're doing a play, you're fucked, man. You're stuck. Yeah. There's nothing. You can't improvise Shakespeare and tell the audience to hark off or whatever.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't look good when Macbeth has to, throw someone out. He breaks character. Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing that's so hard is, like, with the comedy club, I had one recently where, like, I kind of told the bouncer, hey, can you talk to them? And the audience is turned off because now you're the police. Right. You're like, I'm going to call the police on you. You're the nerd, you're the loser, and now you're going to be the badass comedian. So you really want to feel like the club is being the bad guy for you.
Yeah.
Like if anything, you want them to threaten to have them be removed, and you be the guy, be like, nah, it's okay, but shut the fuck up and be cool. And it's hard because the moment you come off as a dweeb, you can't come back from that.
Yeah, I've certainly felt that before, where, like, you have to break what you're doing. I'm up there talking about, airplanes, for God's sake. And then you're just like, be quiet, shut up. I like, do you know how loud you're being? You ruin everybody's night. Like, you just go on this tirade, and then you're just like, so anyway, like, relationships are so crazy. And
Yeah.
how can you, all these people just saw you do something that you weren't doing, and you're kind of getting mad, and you've scolded somebody. It really is a thing of like, it has to get to the point where the whole audience now hates the heckler,
Yes.
you know?
And you have to be able to like have a joke. I always from before I was doing stand up. There's a Dane Cook album where, I mean, talk about like audiences that must have been like
Oh my
very
God.
challenging.
Yes.
Very
Unruly.
challenging.
Yeah.
And even though he was succeeding, I'm sure there was times where he was like, I'm trying to work out a new story and I can't.
Right.
But there was one where like he like did the thing where he completely dropped the comedy and said, "Hey, I'm serious. If you say one more thing, we're going to throw you the fuck out."
Mm-hmm.
And then it was awkward, and he said, "Doesn't it feel like daddy just yelled at mommy at the dinner table or something?" He had a joke, he had a save, and it brought everyone back.
Right.
And that's the key that I don't think I need to like sit down and figure out those lines, because sometimes it's so bad that I do that thing where I either get angry or I say shut the fuck up, but you can hear in my that I'm mad.
Right. Yes.
Or the worst, you try to go sincere. And I've made this mistake before where I'm like, "Hey, listen, you really are ruining the show." And like, it's, these people, and it's not funny. There's nothing funny about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Sometimes you appeal to sincerity, and it never, in my experience, it has never worked.
You just realize how insensitive everybody is. They're just like, this doesn't strike a chord with us at all, that you're trying to appeal to the human part of us.
Yeah.
We don't care at all. We've turned
Yeah.
that off. This will be fun because you do have you have two backgrounds we can pull from here. So before I ask the stand-up version of this, what has been, to your memory or recent recollection, whatever it is, your worst acting, it could be audition, job, whatever it is, what has been one of the worst moments where you're like, why am I here? How am I in this room right now?
I mean, easily the worst. I was in an acting company, in Philadelphia, and I did a play that it was like 20 people in the cast, and my dad came up to see a show, and he was the only person in the audience.
Oh my God.
And it was like we did the show in a church. We moved the pews. So it felt kind of epic. There was lighting, and it was a not great play about a boat that was sinking, and it was like a mix of poems and movement, and there was a long slow motion drowning sequence where music's playing and we're all slow motion running for the boats and trying to say goodbye to a loved one. And I just remember my father alone sitting there as 20 actors in full outfits from the 1600s or whatever, dying in front of him. And there was something so pathetic about this much work for one man who wasn't interested to begin with. And I'll never know what was going through his head of just like, what is my son doing? What is he doing with his life?
Yes.
And again, it's like with stand-up, you can at least adjust. I've performed for two people before, and you fuck with them and you joke and you go in and out. But with a play, you're just going from start to finish, and there's going to be an intermission where you hope my dad comes back.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And there's like a lot of pressure on him. Like, he's got to be focused and there, because if he stops, then who are we doing it for?
Right.
Who are we doing it for? So there is something about theater at the lower levels that is horrifyingly depressing, because you can't really cancel it. You can't cancel it if two people show up. You don't really cancel shows unless no one is there. And I've been in plays where there was a couple times with this company where no one showed up, and we decided to call it that day. And man, it's deeply sad.
I like that there is like a decision-making process still, though. Like, no one's there. and like I just imagine like a bunch of people sort of sitting around a table and like, I don't know. I mean, the yays outweigh the nays to cancel. It's close. It's really close. Like
Yeah.
it's not just like immediate of like, obviously we're not doing this and we may never do this again. Like that would be my feeling. I mean, and then, what so many people I think don't realize with performing arts is like you have to you're dying, you know what I mean? These people they're acting, they're also dying in front of your dad because it's the only person there. And then it's not over. Like the play doesn't end, then everybody goes like, okay, like let's move on to the next thing. It's like you have to now sit in that feeling, especially you, that it was only your dad, and now battle with this idea of like, he just saw me in a horrible light, a real bad light, and I'm trying to go after something that, most people would think is crazy or silly.
Yeah.
And now I have to grapple with that.
And then you have to do bows. And that's a whole sequence. You can't just cut the bows. It's part of the thing. Again, this is not something you can change. I've heard Anthony Jeselnik is one of my favorites. He always talks about his stand-up like a movie. He's like, I'm doing the thing from beginning to end. And I've never had the courage to do that. If something's bombing, I'll change, I'll shift, I'll do whatever it takes to make it okay. But plays are movies. And so you get to the end, you can't go backstage and be like, let's not do the bows today. It's on a track. You got a tech person. So they play the music and you got 20 people doing choreographed bows to one man going,
oh my God. Did you talk to your dad after? Did you have a moment where like now it's just you and your dad?
Yeah, I think we just avoided talking about it. It's so awful. I have no idea what was going through his head.
Right.
It's so in the now I have enough shows that like if I'm going to invite someone to something, I can invite them to something that guaranteed won't be a disaster. But even in the beginning of stand-up, I remember having my stepdad come to a show once where he was one of 3 people there. And this is the first time he's seeing me. So he doesn't have in his head like, oh, when there's 3 people, it's not going to go great. It's just like, God, he sucks. I think he sucks. No one is laughing.
Right.
And just humiliating, man. Just humiliating.
But then there's a part of you that just goes, well, I guess we'll do this again in a couple days. Even in that situation, worst case scenario of if you're performing and you need an audience and there's no audience there, that's the worst thing. That's a real big part of the job that's now not there. You still go, why would I get out of it? Like,
yeah. I mean, I'll always go through with it. I was doing a night at Zany's Rosemont recently, and I couldn't advertise it. Not that I could have sold a lot of tickets necessarily, but I couldn't advertise it because of some conflict with another show coming up. So they did mystery headliner night or whatever. So 12 people were in this gigantic room.
Yes.
And I think they gave me the option to cancel it because in the beginning there were like 2 pre-sales. And you'll never catch me canceling a show, at least now. Right. I'll do it. But it's just really hard. Again, at least as a comedian, you can be like, I'm getting stronger. But man, my God, when it's for 12 people in a huge space, it was so interesting because I was only doing 45 minutes. But when it's that small, the biggest laugh is... And you hit a point where I really understand like, oh yeah, every time people laugh, it gives me a moment to like decide where I want to go next comedically. So 30 minutes in, I had that moment of like, I don't think I have any more material because I didn't have time for my brain to like make new decisions. And it makes you stronger, I guess. And it makes everything else feel so much easier. But
oh yeah, that's a great point. It does. You do that a couple times and then you get in front of like a packed show and you're like, I'm going to have to cut material. It's running,
well, that's why people get bad. That's why it feels like comedians at the highest level, it feels so impossible to not get worse. Cause I just had this effect where I was in Tacoma and Saturday night, both shows were just electric, fantastic audiences, could not have been better. And I was doing all this new stuff and all of a sudden I was like, ooh, all these new things are working so hard or so well. And then you get in front of like a regular audience and you go, oh no, they're not fully there yet. But you go from that high where everything is so good, everyone's so hot, and then you find you find your weaknesses in the tougher audiences.
Yes, truly. Yes. And it makes you better. It makes then those hot rooms so much more hotter, because then everything is, and you start to notice the difference too. I think when like you're in a hot room and you watch somebody like really rip the roof off the place, where you go like where you have a set and you're like, that was pretty good. And then you watch somebody else go up there and you're like, oh, that is actually what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And so you start to think like, this, I thought I was at this level of with this audience, and I did not realize there was another level to get to,
That's
until
maybe
someone
why New
does
York
it.
is the place to be, because I'll go all the time to these local scenes where they have an amazing club, and I'll see these people, and this is not about, I want to make clear, not about any recent club I've done,
Right.
but you'll see these like local people sometimes hosting or featuring for 250 people, shows that New York friends would murder to perform in front of.
They would pay to do them. I
They
mean,
would pay to do them. And I see these hosted features and I'm like, oh boy, they're not good, but they're performing for the best crowd imaginable. And maybe that's why New York is like, as horrible as New York can be sometimes, and as horrible the shows are, maybe that's why you get so strong here, because like you got to be good to get through those shows. And people in the local scene sometimes, I'm like, you don't realize that you're performing in front of the best audience in the world, an audience that should be applauding on each punchline.
Right. Yes.
How hot they are.
They're so hot. That's why I still like, everybody has to work, but it's got to make a living in this business. But like, I'll still take some shows where it's like, this is a break even show, but I get out of New York and I know that I'm going to feel so funny when I get there. Like, I'm going to just be on top of the world because these crowds are going to be just so much better than what is here right now, and you have to have that. On the opposite side of that, New York, it is a tough place sometimes. What do you think your worst stand-up experience has been? And it could be for any of the reasons we described earlier, or it could just be a thing of like, I thought this was going to be a moment that was going to change. Every comic has like 1,000 of those moments where they're really not that big of a deal, but in their head, they're like, this is it. Like, if this has to go well, or I will probably be out of comedy. And then it doesn't. And then 6 years later, you're like, I can't believe I'm still doing comedy. So any of those moments come to mind?
Yeah, this one I think hits all three of my points, including bad comedian. Where in my first year, I had a family member knew someone who was getting married for the second time and wanted a comedian for the bachelor party.
Oh boy.
And they wanted it to be a roast. And I've been doing roasts for a little bit. I wasn't a good roaster, but I wasn't completely new, so I kind of understood what it was. And it was going to pay $600, which was definitely the most I'd ever been paid for a gig. So I went, and this guy was in his 50s. I'll call him Larry, just for the sake of saying it. But so he was in his 50s, and I basically I did a shitload of research. I hired Matt Moran, who runs Comedy Fight Club, to kind of write some extra jokes, because 30 minutes of roast jokes is a lot.
That's a lot. That's 30-minute one-liners, basically.
An insane amount. Yeah. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I'll mix in with some of my stand-up. And so I met with this guy's son. I went out to a bar and asked questions about his dad. And the son was not very helpful. I was like, tell me about your dad. And he's like, we're not really close anymore. He's just really stupid. He's just really fucking stupid. And I was like, okay, good. Fucking stupid. Very good.
Something stupid. Yeah.
I talked to his friends. I talked to his brother. I found his Instagram, and thank God he was a little bit heavy set. But I'm like, all right, that's the theme: is you're fat.
Oh my
God. That's what we're going for. So it's at a steakhouse. It's somewhere in Long Island, and I don't know. I don't know in my head what I thought it was going to be. In my mind, I guess I thought like there would be a podium and maybe other people would roast him, like some version of like the Friars Club roasts was in my mind. So I went to H&M and I bought like a suit. Again, I was getting $600. So I was like, okay, I can spare $20 for a full piece suit at H&M.
Yeah,
And
that
I
will
get there.
disintegrate by the time I leave the show. It will no longer be on me. Yeah.
So I go to the steakhouse and I'm like, where's the room? I'm expecting, I don't know, again, for some theater. So they bring me into like this, I mean, it's like a junky steakhouse, not a nice steakhouse. They bring me to this room. Everyone's in shorts and t-shirts, like cargo shorts. And it's like him, his buddies, again, they're 40s, 50s, and then like some kids that are like, you know, in their 20s, maybe late teens. Moment I get in there, one of the guys like, what the fuck are you wearing? And everyone starts laughing and laughing. And I go, okay, all right, fuck you too. And they say, well, we're going to wait a little for the food to get here before we start. And I was like, okay, that's fine. There's no chair for me. So I'm just standing awkwardly, just standing there. And there's nowhere to perform. They're sitting in the round. So there's no good place for me to stand. So I'm just kind of leaning against the wall, waiting for the food to get there. And they say, do you want anything to drink? And I'm like, oh, I'd love a red wine. And one guy's like, you want a straw with that, you pussy? And again, I'm getting roasted so hard before this has even begun. And I felt young. I was probably 27, 28, but I felt like a child with a bunch of grown men. And it felt like they didn't want this. One of these things where they don't want this. That's kind of a theme of what I'd say of the first three. It's like it felt like they were having a dinner and I was someone's nephew and I was like, please, can I run my comedy show for you? And they're like, fine, but we're not going to pay attention. And I was like, thank you. So the food gets there. They all ordered the same fucking steak. So there's 10 minutes of like comparing. You got it well done. You got it medium rare, cutting, comparing, complaining. And then I get out my note cards and it feels awful. So again, circumstances are terrible. People aren't really paying attention. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. No one wants this. And this was also the beginning of stand-up where I really am putting on a regal voice. Are you ready for the roast, gentlemen? And I go into the jokes and I pulled some of the jokes here where, again, I go like something, they've invited me to the wedding. I guess they need all the hands they can get to pick you up in the chair. He was Jewish. Oh, I said, they told me you used to do triathlons. Now you look like you try not to eat more than a dozen munchkins a day. Gary's the kind of guy you don't want in front of you at Dunkin' Donuts. He can never make up his mind how he wants to get diabetes. And at somewhere here, he goes, okay, enough fat jokes. And I go, enough fat jokes? I looked through my cards, 90% of them are fat jokes.
Right.
So I start dipping into like my material, which is about like my parents are divorced. I went to college for musical theater. There's nothing that these men want less than me talking about going to college for musical theater. And like, I don't have the skills. I don't even have the skills now, but like, you know, they want me to be like, this guy's got a small dick. Oh, you're going to fuck him with that? Look at this balding motherfucker. So, but I end up pivoting. I get to some jokes about his wife, and like one of the first ones I said, Larry, all your friends say you love eating out. Well, everyone except for your fiance. Of this, he looks angry at me for the jokes I'm making. So I'm freaking out. I'm just like collapsing. I'm looking at the clock, waiting for 30 minutes to pass so I can immediately end. And every time they like start talking, part of me is relieved because I'm like, please eat up this time. Yeah, you guys talk. And I think I get to one joke about like something like, your fiance is always dressed up to the nines to make up for the fact that she's a 6. And one of his friends goes, no, she's a 2, a size 2, that is. And he goes, now that's a good joke. They should have hired you to be the comedian. And I'm like, oh, he wanted compliments, I guess. That's what he wanted for this roast, compliments of his fiance. And like finally we hit 26 minutes and I decide that they'll round up. They'll round up. And I go, okay, that's the end of the show. And like, thank God they paid me. Like they were sweet about it. They were very like, thank you for doing that. For all I know, maybe they did have a fun time. But in my mind, it was the most humiliating experience. I mean, worse than performing a 20-person play in front of my dad. It was so degrading. Again, there was something where you wanted to be like, oh, none of us want this. Just pay me the money. We don't have to do the full 30 minutes if none of us are enjoying this. Just pay me for my time and I'll go. Even at that stage, they could have said, hey, why don't you just go? Here's $100. And I would have been like, agreed. You're right. We don't have to go through with this. Clearly, this was a miscalculation on everyone's part.
Right. Yeah. There is a feeling where you just go, not doing this is so much better than doing this, even if it means losing time and money. And, like you said, $100, cover my gas, and it's a wash. Tonight's a wash, and I have a suit. Pay for the suit, and we'll call it even, and at least I get a new suit out of it. But the feeling of, you're touching on a feeling I think a lot of comics get, where it's helplessness. You feel so helpless on stage that like there is nothing you can do to now save the show, the quote unquote show, and you feel alone more than anything, because there's not even like, in that situation, there's not even like an MC or like another comic that's coming up, or a bouncer or anything. You truly are, you leave that room. And also, isn't there kind of a feeling when you're booked for these private events and stuff of like, oh, cool, it's a party. And then there's a moment I always have where it's like, oh, I wasn't invited to this. I am being paid to be here, which means I'm wanted, but I wasn't wanted enough to be invited,
Yeah. Yeah. There's a feeling where, again, that's why there's like this miscalculation where it was like, they're friends, they're having a good time. And when you get a stripper, there's something about like, most of the men there are horny for this, or they're going to enjoy like looking at her. But for me, it's like no one was into it. No one was into it. And I'm doing one-liners. So when you lose them, you're just saying sentences in front of people at a dinner table with no response at all. And yeah, there's just a thing like, and listen, it's so crazy because I did a bachelorette party once where I showed up and there were 6 people. It was a small bachelorette party outdoors, but they were into it. And we did a full stand-up show, and it was like one of the best shows of my life because they were all into it. That's what they wanted. But like, I don't think people necessarily understand what roasts are. And like, this was not a guy who wanted to be roasted. He was not someone who enjoys getting made fun of. And you could tell that from the fact that like in the round, the people whose backs were to me, they didn't even turn around. So it's just like, you don't want this. And roasts are just so specific. I think people assume they see Friars Club roasts or Comedy Central roasts, and they're like, this is fun. Let's just be mean to people. But not everyone wants that. And roast, you want your friends to be doing it. You don't want some young fucking kid coming in being like, you're fat. You're a gross fat fuck, and your wife's pussy is loose, and you're just like, hey, fuck this guy. Who is he? So it's just a good lesson. Roasts, and I will not do customized roasts, are such a huge mammoth task. Like people do not understand how much work it takes to write personalized roast jokes. So like I would not do that. I would hire 3 people to write jokes if I was going to do a roast. If it's not on Comedy Central, if it's not for someone that like I know already, I would never do that gig. $10,000.
Right. I
to
mean,
do that.
you said it, like Comedy Central. they have a team of writers, like a team of top comedy writers sit down to work on these for a while, and they're edited.
Yeah.
It's not like, and it's usually about somebody who's famous. So there's a lot to pull from. Their life has been in the media. When it's just like, someone that owns a construction company, that person doesn't realize that it takes a whole group of people to make it funny, but also that like their life is about to be pulled out. Like, they're like, oh, Alec Baldwin got roasted. People make fun of his hair and his daughter. It's like, well, we're about to do that to you. Do you want that? Do you want your
Yeah, yeah,
daughters
yeah.
to be made fun of? Because that's potentially what's gonna happen.
Yeah, and even those people, I remember like when Trump got the roasted on Comedy Central, helping launch his presidency. Uh, he told them, "You can't make fun of my net worth." That was his one thing that they weren't allowed to make fun of. So people get to set ground rules, and even in Comedy Fight Club, which can get brutal, um, people set their own ground rules. Like you would check with someone before. I mean, I'm sure some people don't or disrespect it, but like it's a courtesy. And I remember one woman, her father was dead, and I was allowed to make jokes about her dad being dead. But she said her father was like also old, like he was an old dad, like she was born when he was like in his late 60s, and she was like, I don't want any jokes about the fact that I had an old dad. And it's very interesting. It's like that's her thing. She doesn't mind me talking about like, oh, these dad jokes are stale, just like your dad, just like his corpse. But like she didn't want the other thing. So maybe he was super sensitive about food. All his friends were like, he's a fat guy, he never eats out. But like, sounds like they don't know him. That's his sensitivity point. I mean, I had so many. I said, oh, you should do yoga. You'll like the end. It's called corpse pose, or in your case, bloated corpse pose. I mean, I had, he like, something about, he flew a lot for work, and I was like, oh, he has to get to the airport early because it takes him 3 hours to take his belt off or something. It was so many fat jokes, and he was not into them, not at all.
Oh my god, that's insane. That's insane. What before we get out of here, so you have a show like that, or what, it could be any bad show. Is there, and I've worked with you, so I know that you are after a show, you like to sort of look at the material, listen back to the material and stuff. You immediately start working on the notes. But do you have anything that you like to do after particularly a bad show that sort of takes you out of that feeling, gives you a little bit of, you know, I don't know, dopamine rush or something that picks you up from that?
It's so tough. I mean, I get stuck in a bad mood. Now I have a girlfriend, and one of the things I'm working on is not kind of saddling her with the role of like cheer me up after the bad show. But I have to like express it to someone. So when I had that happen, I immediately called like 3 people and told them the story. Like there's something about the like, I need to share this embarrassment with someone. That's how I react. I mean, that's why I do comedy. I think that's why a lot of us do. We're like, you have a terrible time, and like some of the relief is like telling people about it. So you can like, maybe in a way it's like to make it almost like it happened to someone else. Like, let me tell you the story of the terrible show, because it relieves some of the pressure. But it's tough. I'm still working on getting out of it. And it can be hard as a comedian, because if you pack your nights and you do late shows, sometimes the late show is just the shitty one, man. I when I was in Tacoma on Friday night, the first show was amazing. And the second show, this was the one where there were like some bad hecklers in the front row. And it was a hard hour to get through. And I felt like shit, man. And I called my girlfriend and I was like, fuck, I'm so mad. So it's tough for me. I have to express it to someone though. And I remember being single and doing a 1 a.m. show at LOL, and there was no one to really call, and just feeling awful. And I guess my solution, it's not like fun, but then I'll listen back and I'll try to like be like, well, I have to make this mean something. I had to have learned something from it. But shows like that Bachelor one, there's times, because I'm very much like a joke guy. I got my material, and I always try to remind myself there are times you have to abandon material and just recognize what is going on in the room. Recognize that this is chaos. Recognize this is a garbage fire, and do crowd work to a certain extent. And like this was tough because like no, it was just awkward. No one wanted to talk. But the worst thing I could have done, which is what I did, was just like look at my note cards and be like, well, this is what we planned. I should have just fucked with these guys. Should have just fucked with them. That's what they wanted. Even if I did it clunkily, even if I just went one by one and said, you got a small dick, you got a small dick. This guy likes sucking dicks. I mean, it would have been a very, given this audience, it would have been a very homophobic crowd work. It can be tough, especially with like men. With a certain kind of man, you're like, that's what they're going to laugh at, is me saying they're gay. That's what they want.
Yeah. They want to be embarrassed in the thing that they're most insecure about, probably, but not but something that they know that like isn't them. Like the fat guy is fat. He can't change that he's fat right now. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like you calling some guy gay goes, oh, that's funny. I mean, I'm not gay. Like everybody knows that I'm not gay. You know, like,
and then you're like I mean, this is why, like, listen, there's some crowd work comedians out there where, you could accuse them of being hacks, but they're also like amazing at what they do. They can make any audience turn on. And like, I did a show recently, again, it was definitely in the bottom 5, where it was like a Jewish youth group, and it was chaos. I mean, these were 16-year-olds. It was impossible. Again, it felt like an impossible type situation. But these guys, these young kids, very homophobic, they were just calling out like stuff like, can you make my friend gay? Can you make my friend gay? And I almost had a moment of like, I wanted to be like, hey, it's okay to be gay. But instead, the only line that worked, and I felt bad about it after, was one of them had a girlfriend who was on the other side of the room. I was like, oh, is that your girlfriend? Oh, I can see why you want to be gay or something. And the audience went wild. And I told my friend about it, and he was like, oh my God, you pointed to a young girl and said, oh, I can see why you want to be gay. You devastated her. She probably went home and has an eating disorder now, and it's a terrible thing. But I was like, that's what they wanted. That's what they wanted.
It's like Dice Clay. Dice Gay.
It was Dice Gay. Andrew Dice Gay. Listen, I hope we come to a day where you can make fun of a guy for being straight and everyone goes, oh, this guy looks like he eats pussy, and everyone goes, ugh, you suck. You fucking hetero. Wouldn't that be wonderful someday if hetero becomes an insult? I am not a heterosexual. Hey, that would be progress, I think.
Yeah. Just just someone being like, nice shirt. What did your wife pick that out? And everyone's like, oh my God, he's got a wife. I
can't tell you. I mean, you work these rough and tumble clubs, and you'll see a comedian, 2 guys sitting next to each other. You guys fucking? And everyone goes nuts. Yeah. Nuts. They go wild, applause break. And you really got to train yourself to be like, I am not going to do that.
Right.
Even if I'm bombing, even though I know it'll make me good on the show, I'm not going to rely on calling 2 men sitting next to each other gay.
Right. Yes, exactly. It's about as low grade humor as you can get. I mean, it's like playground middle school humor,
And it's hard. I mean, I've been more because I have jokes because I went to musical theater camp, and like I have some joke about like I've never sucked a dick, but once I was eating a banana, and when no one was watching, I put it in my ass or something like that. Like I do things where I like toy with, or I've gotten a blowjob from a man at musical theater camp, and like I have some of these stories that are deal with homosexuality, and like, man, when I'm on the road, I feel how not progressive America really is. You assume in New York you feel safe in these things, and also I'll make a joke about putting a banana in my ass, and I see the men in the audience go, oh, that's actually gay. Dude, what the fuck? Like I see them turn off, and I'm like, are you serious? The joke about putting something in my ass is like is you can't even handle it. And I feel a new, like, I really recognize that it must be tough, where if you're a gay comedian and you're just talking about your life experience, that there are massive swaths of this country that will go, no, do not talk about that. And that's why they laugh when you're like, you two fucking? So you got to try to fight to be the comic you want to be, and not the comic that will kill in every room.
Yeah, there is some pride in, like, if I'm gonna die, it's gonna be on my own terms. I won't.
Yeah.
I'll die on my own sword. I won't let these people bring me to that level. I'll do everything
Yeah.
else. I'll do every other. I'll really amp everything else up. I'll be louder. I'll be a little bit dirtier, whatever it is, but I won't do that.
I'll do anything for the laugh.
Having some principles, though, is, I think, not a bad thing in this business, which tends to be a
Sure.
pretty lawless, principleless business.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I'm just monitored by the fact that, like, I have comedians out there who I, like, really respect, who I don't want them to think I'm a hack. Like, that's really my morality. For, I was going to say better for worse, but for worse, is dictated by, I don't want people to think I'm a hack. And yeah.
I mean, so much, I think, of what you feel as a comic is peer driven, of, like, if this person sees me. I mean, I know the feeling of, like, if I'm on stage and a really good comic walks in the room, like, or if I know that they're in the room before I go up, I'm like, oh God, like, you're just in your head, immediately.
Yeah. I was doing Comedy Cellar has, like, it's an open mic of sorts. They call it New Jokes Night, where you're allowed to bring your pad up, allowed to, but, like, no one minds. And I was there, and, like, Louis C.K. went up, and then Sam Morril went up, and I just had this feeling of, like, oh, I guess I'm not doing new material tonight. I'm doing A+ material because I just felt that pressure. I was like, these are two genius comedians, and, like, if they're even maybe in the room, I have to do okay in front of them. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. There's a thing with me where it's like, I just need a comedian to see me kill once, and then, because you just want them to know. I want them to know that I could be doing better if I wanted to, but I'm being an artist today. And then you look back, and I think about when I see comedians working on new stuff on stage, I'm like, I never really judge them. I understand what we're all doing, but in my mind, I'm like, no one will understand. They will just think that I suck. And it's there's so much about being a comedian. It's constantly fighting the struggle, especially once you have those good jokes, to not just do them again and again and again. And, like, I go through waves where all of a sudden I'm like, I gotta kill. I'm doing all this old jokes, and then I'm like, I suck. I'm such a loser. I'm not doing anything new. I'm not growing. I'm not learning. And then you do that for a little, but then you're not doing well all the time, and you're like, oh, everyone thinks I suck. They think I'm not a good comedian. And it's like, that's the balance you have in the whole life. I see Bill Burr go up and working on new and, like, bombing, like, purposefully in front of a packed room. And I'm like, even at his level, that takes courage. It takes courage to have a hot show. Know you could be getting everyone laughing and loving you and asking to follow you after the show, and being like, no, I need to work on something. And this audience will be going like, what is this? This is not good. But that's why, like, people like Bill Burr are so prolific, because they have that courage to, like, to do it. And I just think even at that level, especially, he's probably working on new stuff in theaters that are sold out. And there must be something inside of him that's like, dude, come on, dude, just do the thing that kills. Just do the thing that kills. And I think, like, so much of being a good comedian over the span of a lifetime is being able to be a slave to that feeling.
Yeah, it probably even is more courageous because, if I bomb, everyone just goes, that guy bombed. If Bill Burr bombs, you're really disappointing a lot of people. Like,
Yeah.
he has way more pressure to give these people a good night than I certainly do. because he's Bill Burr. And yeah, but the thing is, I sort of always think like, I still want to be doing this in 10 years. And the people that aren't doing that will not be doing it in 10 years, because
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to survive on this. Eventually, everyone's going to hear it and it's going to become so stale that it doesn't work anymore.
Sure. I mean, but there are those people out there, like, I mean, it's weird because I think I'd go crazy, but I know people who are in their 60s where there was a certain club where they were still doing every time from beginning to end, and it would crush because it would be like a super touristy crowd. But you were like, don't you go crazy? Like, you're not getting a lot of money for this, so why would you want to do this again? And I'm convinced that they just got so used to being the best on the show and crushing each time. They just one day they couldn't bring themselves to do something new. And then the new stuff is so bad compared to the stuff they've been doing for 40 years. 40 years. So every moment in it is perfect. Every line, it's punchline so dense. And then they do something new and they're like, why would I do this? Why would I do this? And I don't think I'll ever be like that because I would go crazy. This is why I stopped doing theater. You do the same thing over and over again. I went nuts. But I just think that's as much of being a comedian as it is being, just talented to begin with. It's just like also about that process and that, like, I think about it. It's funny to me to think how many people came to see me in a show and little do they know I'm not giving them the best show I could. Like, if they knew, they might be like, what the fuck? I paid regular price. I hope someday to be at a level where I'm like, I love the idea of people who can go to a club and be like, hey, just so everyone knows, this is the new material night, so it's going to be a bumpy ride. But when you're doing it at my level, like, I have to decide, okay, I'm going to do some new stuff here. And it would be funny if I said, I don't do it, but if I say to the audience, hey, just so you guys know, I could be doing much better than this. I could make your night. I could make you laugh so hard right now, but not tonight. I'm doing new stuff tonight. I'm using you tonight for a hopefully better show somewhere down the line.
Right. So that in the future, someone is going to get a really great show. Someone's going to have a way better night than you. Won't be you. You will, and by the time I come back here, it'll have to be new again because I can't do the updated version, because you're going to kind of know.
Yeah.
So you're never going to get, unless there's a change up with the calendar, you're never going to get me, at my best.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for your time for doing this. This is a great conversation. So fun. And I told you to be a half hour and we're almost double that. So I appreciate you hanging out.
My pleasure.
Please tell people where they can find you, where they can see you and your special that's out.
Yeah. So you can find me on everything at Gianmarco Soresi. I got a special called Shelf Life. You can watch it on Amazon, or it's now on YouTube too, under the Laugh Buttons YouTube channel. And find me on Instagram or join the MailChimp, the Eat Blast for all upcoming dates. But I'm going to North Carolina. I'm going to Oklahoma City, Connecticut. I'm going to be in Gilda's Laugh Fest in Grand Rapids, Michigan. A lot of dates. I'm touring around the country looking for the next variant, and we're getting close. So please just find me and see me. And if you're ever in New York, I'm at the Comedy Cellar as often as I can be, as often as they'll let me. And a lot of cool shows coming up. And I promise, if you go to the show, whoever is listening, I'm gonna give you my best, 100%. Old material. Obama being president material. And it is fine-tuned.
Yeah, it's so dated that people are like, I don't know if he knows that, like, you're like, but this is the best,
You see those comedians talking about MapQuest and you're like, boy, oh boy, man, that is wild shit.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh man, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Good to see you, and I'll talk to you soon.